1 minute at the Multi-Format Network.
You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, here with a couple of real gurus, folks. We've got a couple data governance experts on the call today. We've got Sarang Bapat from Mitsubishi Electric Trane US, or METUS, M-E-T-U-S, and Michael Baraz, most recently from Walgreens, the Walgreens Boots Alliance, both experts in building out data governance programs. And it's a good time to be in the data governance field. You know, these folks have kind of slogged through the hard years back when you really couldn't do much. I often joke that 10 years ago and beyond, basically, you could control data access at the database level, you could control certain things at the application level, but there was nothing in between. And both of those, database and application, are very particular, meaning you have to have someone says, okay, you have access to this, you have access to that. Well, the world got way too complex for that to be a reasonable strategy going forward. It's just not doable. It's not tenable. There are lots of different things that have happened recently. There's a company, Okira, that just got acquired by Databricks. They do sort of dynamic analytic governance, which is interesting. There are other companies in that space, Immuta, Privacera, there's at least one other. And they're all coming in to try to dynamically ascertain, should this person have access to that information or not? Well, what is the purpose of data governance? It is to maintain some control, some guardrail around the use of data for decision-making, for reporting, for whatever the case may be. And we're really getting somewhere these days. So I'm going to let each of our guests introduce themselves and tell us a bit about what they're working on. First, Sarang Bapat from Mitsubishi. Tell us a bit about yourself and your data governance program that you run.
Hi, thanks, Eric. My name is Sarang Bapat. I'm a Director of Data Governance at METUS. I have a lot of experience in data governance, data management space, previously in the financial services world with Truist, Wachovia, Wells Fargo, USAA. And currently I am in a supply chain domain with METUS, where we are starting our data governance program and trying to set our analytics environment. And difference between what I have been doing before and this one is more of a rationale. So before, financial services rationale was more on the defensive side of the equation. So regulatory landscape was heavy and reason for doing data governance. Whereas here at METUS, we are more of a supply chain, supply distribution company. It's more of an offensive rationale. So I'm excited about getting started setting up our data governance program.
Yeah, and let's get Michael Baraz in as well, our other data governance guru. Michael, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do in the data governance space.
So data is pretty much underlying all the application stuff that we do. So, you know, it just became obvious that that was a place to focus my time and energy. When I was a developer, and over time I just got more specialized in data, and then from engineering and architecture and other aspects of it, I wound up just finding data governance was really the weak link in the big chain, and started spending more time in there. Started, I don't know, 5 or 7 different data governance programs for banks, for insurance companies, oil and gas. Most recently, you mentioned Walgreens, and just wrapping that up. And working now on a program at Carnegie Mellon University in your very hometown, Eric. And,
there you go.
Yep, and working on the Chief Data Officer Certificate program there, and it's a fantastic adventure.
Yeah, and data governance now is a very, very hot topic. I was saying at the outset here, I'll throw this over to Sarang, and then maybe Michael, if you want to comment on it. 5 to 10 years ago, 10 years ago especially, it was very difficult to actually do this stuff. And so you would have policies, and you would hope that people read the policies and abided by the policies. And there wasn't a whole heck of a lot that you could do to stop it. But now, I think because of the confluence of several developments, one of which is the ability to manage data at scale, one of which is the ability to write policy and have it actually execute. In other words, you write the policy, and that does, in fact, govern whether or not someone gets access to the data. That's pretty cool stuff now. We can do that. We couldn't really do that effectively 10 years ago. I mean, you might have been able to pull it off if you had real gumption and a lot of money and you really forced it through. But I think also what's happening is the mindset is really changing. I think that maybe it's the breaches, maybe it's just a general awareness by the executive teams and by business people that this stuff is valuable and we have to keep it within a certain confine so it doesn't get misused. So you don't use the wrong data to make some big decision in your business. And so you don't use dirty data. So we're really kind of getting somewhere, don't you think, Sarang?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody is starting to realize, I mean, whether it's a healthcare to manufacturing to financial services to marketing, agency type organizations, is data really is your competitive advantage. I mean, that is how good data you got of your own company, as well as how you can combine that maybe with the other third-party data to make decisions or campaigns or better analytics is going to, take you further, or it's going to break you, depending upon how you approach the data governance, right? So there is a big realization around that. And to your point, it was a little bit of regulation around privacy, a little bit of the breaches, a little bit of competitive advantage scale. So all of these things are coming together, and technology is getting better and better. I think time to market to do some of these things, that's what used to be much longer. Now we are at a point where it is compared. You could start something and actually show and demonstrate the value fairly in a short amount of time, which was unthinkable a few years ago. So all of these things are coming together for the good of the data governance programs.
Yeah, and we've got one of our virtual studio audience members threw a question over already asking, do you think CCPA, GDPR, and the fines that come with those have inspired data governance? I mean, Sarang, I think the answer is absolutely yes, without question.
Absolutely.
Right, but it's not just the stick, right? The compliance is the stick. Right. What you want is the carrot. And the carrot is the value that you gain in data literacy. And we did a bit of a presentation before the show today. And for those who missed that, it'll be on the episode page at dmradio.biz. But Michael, I'll throw this over to you. Now, I remember when the Enron scandal broke out, and of course, the government got together and they passed legislation, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which told organizations, public companies, I think primarily, you need to document your processes for how you get this information. You need to document who's working on what, all this sort of audit trail stuff, because, well, guess what happened? The traders, it was really the traders that were doing the bad stuff. It wasn't the energy producers. It was the people sitting on top trading, and they created some shell companies and all kind of goofy stuff was going on there. And then, of course, when the economy slows down, you get to see all the bodies, if you will, that are in the shallow water. But Michael, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, no, the positive side of this, the carrot that you're talking about, I think is the biggest driver of this whole thing could likely be data citizen, right? The ability to go out and go get some data, do some model, do some reporting, do something useful with data that isn't a data specialist. The role of the person may be a financial analyst, or might be, whatever role in the company that isn't really a data specialist. They can go get the data, but to get the data, they have to know where to find it. They have to know which pieces of data, which are the represented or maybe authoritative sources of data to use for a given model. And all this stuff has to be documented somewhere other than, Joe or Sally or whoever is the resident expert. And by the way, they've just put in their notice that they're retiring in a couple months, and then that goes out the door. So all the more critical that we capture all of this stuff and have it in a place that people can access it across the organization.
Yeah, and you really do want it to be centralized in terms of having what we could call a control plane, right, Sarang? I mean, that's kind of what you're talking about, is having a control plane, because you have all these other tools that come into the picture. You've got all the data movement tools, for example. You have data catalogs, which are getting very popular these days. You can have other technologies, data quality, little bits and pieces along the way, but you want to be able to synthesize all of that in a program office, if you will, such that it's documented, but also such that anyone who comes in can kind of quickly understand where it goes, where it comes from, who's doing what with it. And if that's not dynamic, if that's not dynamically pulling from systems of record, then it's just someone's theory, right, Sarang?
Right, absolutely. And the data governance end product or the portal, Michael, you were referring to it as a democratization or the data marketplace, is somewhat like an Amazon data experience, right? So idea would be anybody or a data citizen trying to do something with the data comes to a data governance portal where he sees something about, let's say, customer, and he types the word customer. It starts to show a lot of the assets that are approved by the data stewards on whether it's the report or the terms or the rules, whatever those may be, to pop up. And if they click any of those artifacts, it would tell who owns that, what asset was used. People can have like some sort of a scoring system to say it's a 5-star asset, a 4-star asset, like a Yelp type reviews. And if you like what you saw on the asset, you can say, I want to shop for that data, so to speak. You click a button to get the access to it, and it goes back to the owner or the data steward. So it's that whole chain can be so it's a simplified experience for the data citizen. So you can come to that place and be able to do that. And data governance portal at the matured stage would look something like that, which is you're doing it in a self-service fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, Eric, it's all real-time connected to the right source, authoritative source, documented information, data quality scores overlaying on top of that from the other component, but it's all seen in one place. So you're not going multiple places for it, trying to call somebody to know about it. It's kind of an integrated view of your data at your fingertips. That's what you really are looking for as a data citizen, right?
Yeah, and I think you just hit the nail on the head. Michael, I'll let you comment on that. You hit the nail on the head instead of calling someone, because that's what you used to do. You used to pick up the phone and call someone, and that's great. But now there's just a finite connection between two people over a phone line, and that information is not captured. You need to capture the information in a platform such that you can see, and that way you don't have to call people, and that way the person who was called doesn't have to call 5 other people to tell them what happened. I mean, you look at the collaborative capabilities that have rolled out in just the last few years, and I often credit Google and Google Docs for really changing the dynamic on that. You would have expected it from Microsoft. They kind of came after with Teams, and they're sort of retrofitting all that. But Michael, I'll throw it over to you to comment on.
Yeah, I was going to extend Sarang's metaphor with with Amazon, right? So there are 2 aspects of that I think are really interesting beyond the one you made. One is when you do go and find data in the catalog, the question is, which is, of the 15 varieties or versions available, which is the one to use? So one is going to be the featured product. It's going to come up first. And then, on the right side, it might say, and other sellers of data might be, these providers here on the right, right? And they may be some intermediary data sources, warehouses, marts, whatever, right? And then the second thing is when you're finding the data that you do need, you add it to your cart, and then you literally check it out, and then you get a data set delivered to you. That's an amalgam of data from 5 or 7 different places, all built into one nice, easy to access data set.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have an audit trail, who worked with what, who did what, where, all these issues about lineage. And, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the data pipeline space, right? So companies will build data pipelines that are pulling from different areas, and you want that to be, again, as dynamic as possible. But you have to have some way to, number one, be able to capture policy, write policy, implement policy, and then monitor over time. And Sarang, in your keynote before the radio show started, you were talking about that, right? Having some key metrics that you can look for, like number of rules that you have in play, number of departments that have been onboarded. Talk about that just for a second, if you would.
Yeah, so as you scale your data governance program or the platform, you will start to see or be able to actually show the metrics around number of systems that are onboarded onto your platform. You can say number of data sets cataloged. You can say number of data stewards using your system, number of data quality rules that are being used, are being developed and used. And all of those kind of speak to pretty much adoption of your platform, mainly like who is using it. It's kind of like fingerprinting behind the scenes of the user base, right? What capabilities they use, because a lot of times things come up on implementing or developing a pretty complex capabilities around the data governance products, and it's one thing to kind of build those, but ability to see actual adoption of those is whole another. And I think currently a lot of the platforms already do a lot of stuff that is required. So without doing much of a custom work, I think fingerprinting these things and seeing these metrics would be a very good way to start monitoring and seeing on an ongoing basis how things are tracking.
Yeah, and Michael, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, in the previous conversation, we were talking about usage analytics, and again, going back to the concept of not only who's using it, but how many times is this data set or this data attribute, this entity, whatever it is, how much usage is it getting? And, if at all possible, even for what? Because if we can rank the value of data, now we're getting to something really critical and understanding which data to govern, because there are literally millions of attributes the company would typically have, and, monitoring and governing them and managing them all at equal level it's not pretty, it's not smart, and it's really not even possible. So now let's take the old Pareto thing, 80-20, right? So I'm going to take the 20% of the data, which is 80% of the usage, and I'm going to really focus my attention and curation on those items. The other stuff will rank to some level of need, and we'll have to draw the line somewhere at what we honestly can have the capacity to do. Now, you mentioned earlier about automation, right? And automation of tools was a huge point of inflection where data governance became realistic to do at scale, to do across the organization rather than just, a couple hotspot things where it was useful or helpful or whatever. But now, with automation, the ability to go out there and monitor new data sets appearing in some folders or some data store, wherever, lake, whatever. We have a whole lot more range of capabilities and at scale.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So we have the capacity to do these things now, and we'll talk about this in the next segment. Performant, whatever you have, the system must be performant, otherwise people go around it. That's one reason why we had all these troubles, because people got tired of waiting for things and said, I'm just going to go ahead and take a copy of this data and have fun with it myself. But folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
What if you could own?
All right, great job. One down, three to go. This is fun. We got a good question from an audience member too. We can pick this up in the next segment. What data governance model have you used? Centralized, decentralized, federated, hybrid? Based upon your experience, why did you use it? And let's see, what were some of the critical key organization characteristics that drove your decisions? That's something we can dive into.
That's the next seminar?
The next segment, yeah.
No, I'm not telling you. That's a seminar by itself.
Yeah, it is.
It really is.
I would agree.
It's a huge conversation because there's no right answer. It's a question of like, how does your organization work?
Right.
How diverse are the different product lines? I mean, there's like a bunch of different variables to the answer.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
So if you wanted to do a segment on that or a session on that, that would be interesting by itself.
Yeah, that's a good idea. In fact, that's a good idea.
I would agree
some
with that.
notes here.
And then there's what they say, and then there's how it actually works.
Well, that's a very interesting point, right? So there's also this, this is a bit tangential, but there's this whole concept of surveys, right? And of asking people what they want. And you can ask people what they want, and they'll give you all kind of answers. but it's not always what they really want. It's what they think they want or what they think they're supposed to say that they want. And to know what they want, you kind of have to watch what they do, right? And just kind of monitor that. That's where this observability stuff gets very interesting to me is, and maybe we'll pick it up there. The attendee writes, David writes, thanks. It was a loaded question for sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's okay. That's okay. We like loaded questions.
It's good.
They keep the conversation going.
Are you saying you like to get loaded? Is that what you just said? Did I hear you correctly?
I am a good Chicago boy. We like our beer. I'm not going to lie. Oh, yes. Let's see. We got about a minute and a half left. Is that right? And then there's this whole concept around centers of excellence, right? So you'll have like a BI center of excellence. I remember when those things started coming around, probably like 12, 15 years ago, they would start. And to me, it should be related to something like a data governance program, right? Shouldn't a data governance program be part and parcel to a center of excellence for analytics?
So we just had a very interesting conversation about that a few months ago. And there's a center of excellence. There's a center of expertise. There's a center of practice or a community of practice, which Sarang has already mentioned. Yeah. So you got these three different things, and depending what your organization, again, depending what your organization is like and what the tolerance is or what the need is, sometimes you're literally providing expertise, and sometimes it's a community of, kind of like a user group type of approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bottom up, top down, or consultative method that kind of drives out which one of those three you might use.
Well, data. Well, let me think about this. Snowflake has their whole marketplace, right? They're getting big into data sharing, and that is, I would imagine, something you want connected to a data governance program. In a sense, I mean, sharing is a governance issue, right? Whether you share or don't share, that's a question that a governance program would decide, right?
Right. And, that's why we have data owners or
right.
Doug Laney prefers to call them data trustees. He doesn't like the term owner. And I like that.
Yeah,
I
like
agree
that.
with him. So you got your data up, the
All right,
owner.
5 seconds.
Subject to borrower and property qualifications. Not all borrowers will qualify. Terms and conditions apply. Equal housing.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things data governance. Can data be governed or only people, right? I think you have to be a sentient entity to be governable, right? But you can govern the flow of water, for example. That's what plumbing does. And that's kind of what we're talking about. You have different filters, quality filters in your plumbing. If you have hard water, for example, you want to get some water softener. In fact, we were talking again before the show in our little keynote with Sarang about Tide and how in different countries they have R&D centers because the water is different here, there, and other places too. And you start thinking about GDPR and CCPA and some of these other regulatory frameworks. Well, yes, we need to pay attention to those. But I think maybe, Sarang, I'll start off with you. I'm a big fan of cliches, and there's a very old cliche that doesn't get much use anymore that just says, well begun is half done. And the point being, if you get off on the right track, if you really think through what you're doing and you have a framework and you've actually thought through all this stuff, you're going to be well on your way to having a decent data governance program. Whereas if you are like a lot of developers are, right? They just want to do stuff. Business people just want to get stuff done. Who cares how? Just get it done. You got to be careful when you're mixing that with the data world, because again, you could wind up with data sets that should not be used for a particular purpose. And of course, that's part of GDPR, right? Is fit for purpose. Why are you collecting this data? What are you going to use this data for? I mean, here in the States, it's still kind of the wild, wild west with the exception of California. But Sarang, if you are a thoughtful organization and you document things and you work out processes and workflows and so forth, then you're going to have a much better chance at rolling out a good data governance program than otherwise, right?
I would agree with that. So typically, I mean, when you start out, I would start with understanding what your program is about and why you are doing that program, whether it is more of a regulatory landscape or whether they are more going after building digital communities. What's the reason for going after?
Right.
And then typically, when you talk about the data governance rationale and then the capabilities, like what capabilities you want to build after the rationale, I typically like to go after the foundational capabilities first, like the metadata lineage and data quality, because that unfolds a lot of your issues or the challenges or things that you need to get under control. Anyways, so once you do that, so start with few pillars, not all the pillars, because there are many other pillars you can talk about, like issue management, data change management, retention. I mean, there are a lot of topics that you can tackle in your program, but when you're starting out, understand why you're doing it, what few first basic capabilities you start with, and then pick a use case that is most impactful, more bang for the buck. And if it is the customer data that you're trying to clean up because the campaigns are not going well, or customer acquisition is getting difficult, or any of that rationale, use a use case that would make a big bang for the buck for your program, and go after that in a complete fashion to say these 3 or 4 pillars, this one use case, this is how the end-to-end framework looks like, and then capture how many systems for customer, how many stewards we capture, how many rules, how many critical elements documented, how is the lineage looks like, and make a story out of that. Because once you do all of that, that initial push and the communication and the right, publication about how it went, I think you are well on your way. To your point, well begun is half done. You kind of get that traction with the right use case, not too big, because people who are not familiar in the enterprise lose touch of, if you try to throw a lot of tech and business processes and on top of what they don't know, the programs are going to fizzle pretty quickly. So you need a right kind of balance there.
Yeah, you have to focus on the low-hanging fruit. And, Michael Baraz, I'll bring it back in. I remember these exact kinds of conversations when talking about master data management, right? Product information management was arguably first, and Sarang, can probably comment on that with a supply chain focus these days. But the question was, well, where do you start? What do you want to master first? Do you want to master your customer data? Do you want to master your product data? I mean, this world of master data management is very tightly woven together with data governance, right, Michael?
Yeah, and that's kind of the notion of multi-domain master data management versus single domain, and tools are kind of optimized for that or not, depending. And the better tools, at least in my opinion, the better tools that do support that idea of multi-domain master data, because if you're mastering customer in one tool and your articles and products in another tool, or even if they're in the same tool but different, kind of separated, not really brought together. I talk about the knowledge graph a lot. If they're not working together, you've got, major disparities or, impedance mismatch, you might say. And it's really critical that you do it. Now, the other thing we can do is we could parallelize, to get, the fast track going. We could have different SMEs and different domain, different owners, different data areas. They can start their thing and you just kind of project manage it, and you can set up 2, 3, 4 different master data tracks concurrently, and the same thing with other areas. So I think that's really helpful to do if you're bootstrapping something.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Sarang, I'll throw this one over to you. Product information management, supply chain management, of course, between the tariffs that we had a few years ago on China, and then, of course, COVID, and now this war in Ukraine, lots and lots of disruptions in supply chain. And if you're in a manufacturing company, that's a really big deal. Like, all of a sudden, you really need to understand which products go into which, in other words, which parts go into which products, where do we get these things from, how can we manage this whole web of details. The problem with supply chain management is you have, in many cases, thousands and thousands of products. Some of them are very, very small, but they're crucial. Without this one little piece, without that chip from Taiwan, you're going to have a hard time finishing that car. So tell us a bit about how data governance and these sorts of programs can facilitate even a very unwieldy discipline like supply chain management.
And that's an excellent point, because the product management, what you call, is, I would say it's some base material management, like setting up of the material or the base information. And literally that information, which is as simple things as your name, dimensions, weights, other things, have significant impacts on logistics, how the logics are written on, how the deliveries are done. When things come inside the warehouse, how do they get stored? So there is a lot more to it than just the basic setting up the material. That has a real implications on how that material, when it goes out, material becomes an inventory. That's when things starts to scale. So you may have 20,000 materials only that gets to 2 million deliveries a month or something like that. Each of them has combinations of those 20,000 materials. But if that base information in those 20,000 is not accurate, it poses all kinds of problems, either in the warehouse or in the order entry or in the logistics. So it kind of downstream impacts are tremendous. So controlling that at the source and making sure the master data is accurate and it's well understood, quality rules written on it, ongoing monitored, is a huge advantage.
Yeah, that's right. And Michael, you talked about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. I've learned a long time ago in financial services, for example, in banks, when they close at the end of the month, the exceptions are the killer. Like most of the accounts go through fine, but the handful that don't, that's what takes all the time. And when we're talking about these governance programs, you want to solve problems, like Sarang said, as far upstream as you possibly can, because the error propagation spreads out across that whole, or fans out across that whole array of workflows and processes. And what does that mean? Tons and tons of manual work, fixing the same problem again and again and again. This is one of my soapbox issues that crushes morale in the organization, right, Michael?
Yeah, and thinking about this again more holistically, there's the relationship between things, and that's the concept of ontology, right? So, like we want to provide which is the authoritative source of data and other, kind of governance related features like that, the ontology provides an awful lot of the graph of knowledge of these relationships between data. So if we're talking supply chain stuff, like what is the impact, or what does it relate to, or how is that connected to something else, so that we don't miss something. So we have the real complete line of sight of what we're thinking we're supposed to be fixing or managing or addressing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And again, we get back to the importance of data for driving decisions, the importance of getting fresh data too, right, Sarang? Like you want data as fresh as possible. And that means you're not going to have time to do all sorts of manual transformations on things. I mean, this is what has happened over the years, is that people will get a source of data, they'll load it into Excel, they play around with it, and in their little particular worldview, they understand what that all means, but the rest of the business doesn't. And so that's where the problems occur, right? Is you now lost that line of sight about what's happening at this one juncture, which may not seem like a big deal to someone, but to the people downstream, yeah, that's a big deal. What do you think, Sarang?
Yeah, and that's kind of extending to the concept of the data lineage, right? So where it came from and where it is hopping all the way through the organizational asset to where it is going. And it's kind of quite critical that many a times what happens is something goes through 3 or 4 hops and quality checked only on the far left once, assuming that everything looked good on here, but by the time it reaches all the way to the target, crossing 3 or 4 hops, something happened along the way. So we didn't check the quality, and across each of those hops would cause problems. So, knowing where it is going, how many hops it is crossing, and checking quality at each of those hops is kind of critical. at the points that make sense. So at the point of consumption, at the kind of production, at the point of where it is landing into your warehouse. So the critical spots where it is landing and from where there are other downstream users, I think it's very important to check the quality on all of those hops, not just on one or the other, because you might have a really good source data on the far left, but then the transformations cause something to break on the downstream that was not caught. So those kinds of things, these platforms like data governance or adding rules at multiple hops, showing the lineage, I think those are very powerful ways to make sure the entire supply chain for the data is right.
Yeah, that's right. And Michael, you want to get input from people along that whole supply chain, right? You want people on the front end, for example, to have the ability to comment on something and say, hey, all of a sudden I'm not getting this data. Whereas before I was, even a customer service rep, for example, why did this data go away? That gets into this observability stuff and being able to monitor when a data feed changes significantly, when it stops altogether. That triggers alerts, but you have to watch out to not have too many alerts. You want to have just enough alerts to know what to work on, right, Michael?
Yeah, there's two aspects of that immediately come to my mind. One is anomaly detection, the rules that we keep talking about, where the rules coming from. Well, a lot of them are coming from SMEs, but then there's rules that just pop up that no one ever really documented that really are critical. And machine learning and anomaly detection go hand in glove. And that is one of the things that, get queued up for a data steward approval or a SME approval or something like that. So then it becomes part of the rule set, right? And then the second thing is, you're talking about observability and the new data observability tools are phenomenal because they give you line of sight to the operational aspect, the data ops stuff. So is the product, is the data getting from point A to point B on time and, as published, are we getting it as, what's being sent? Are we getting that as received in the same, level of quality? So no issues there. And then you got, the concept of the water distribution system. You got a main, right? So you got your data pipeline, you got a main distribution, then you got all these tributaries, and you were talking about Excel and all those things. And it's like, we ideally would want to stop people from taking extracts and work in the environment, the analytics platform, that they don't go off thinking they're working off of current data when in fact it's 2 days old and they're not getting refreshes. And then there's the management of them. So you're going, back to your main title of this whole series today, and that is we've got to manage the people, and part of that is trying to get agreement on what data people can use and how they get access or approval to use it. What are the terms and conditions for data sharing? What are the lifetime, the term limits of the data? When does it expire? Is there a refresh? Back to my previous point. So there's like a ton of things that we've got, basically wrapped into this concept of a data sharing agreement. And it's not like we're trying to be, restrictive in the concept of governance, but we're trying to be supportive of what the people are using their data for and making sure that they're going to get what they think they're looking for instead of, oh, I got it all figured out, and yet they don't have the insight to know.
That's right. No, that's a very, very good point. And in the next segment, I want to kind of get into projects and what is reasonable to expect your team to deliver and that kind of thing. So folks, don't touch that down. We're talking to two data governance experts today on DM Radio. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Do you own an annuity?
Do you own an annuity?
No, I don't. This is cool stuff. Yeah. So I'd love to get into some projects. And then if you guys can stick around for like 7 minutes afterwards, I think we teased people with offering some insights on which products work best in which environments, et cetera.
Yeah, I never did get a hold of Brian yet. I got to connect with him on data.world.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, he and I have had a couple LinkedIn exchanges, but I haven't reached out to him to set up time.
Yeah, I'll try to do that too, because I'd like to do some sort of, maybe in like Q3 or something, try to plan a virtual summit where we can get some of those folks to come in and do a bake off or just do something where we kind of get into the weeds a bit.
Yeah. And if
Well,
you ever want to do something about, how to choose, now, that's kind of the descriptive side of it, but the prescriptive side of it, how to create an RFP, what are the factors, scoring.
That's a great idea. That's a great, what we should do, and I've talked about this for years and haven't done it in a long, long time. But then I have to look into these programs a bit more. But you use a webinar to deliver some content, but then you capture that and then you port it over to a class, like a Coursera class or something like that.
Yes, exactly. You and I had the same exact thought. Right, you can monetize that second part of that.
Exactly, because it is very useful stuff, and it's like, yeah, you can ask ChatGPT. That's true; it may give you some good insights, but it's always good to talk to an expert and to have that opportunity. And then, of course, for the live version, you can interact with the teacher, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, RFPs, man. I thank God there are people who are diligent and disciplined enough to write those. That's not going to be
well,
me.
I've done a few, so I'm definitely a veteran of that game. And
well, you learn. I mean, you learn.
That's the thing. Every time I start up a new data governance program, it's like, okay, I've learned all this stuff. Now I'm going to tweak it and do this part of it better, this part of it different, and get it's amazing how each one of these is each one of these iterations has just really brought the next one up a level. A huge level.
When I really, data literacy is such an important issue these days, and it's like everyone has to do something to get a better appreciation for the data that they have in their organization. And of course, all this third-party data. I mean, in a way that the rate of change is so fast now that it's kind of hard to stay on top. And and the folks in organizations like yourselves have to stay focused on deliverables and program components, et cetera. Meanwhile, outside, it's like that innovation wheel is just flying around and around. It's like, oh my goodness. It's a blessing and a curse to be a CIO these days.
Yeah, one of the things, Sarang, that you brought up was data quality rules. And, one of the things that I was insistent upon, kind of tying it into the RFP thing, is having the integration between tools that are related. So if I create data quality rules in my data quality product, can I bring those data quality rules, the catalog, the book of rules, the rule book, can I bring that into my data catalog tool for, my data consumer portal?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think have faced issues where when you have a legal entity issues between bank and the insurance part of the business,
right.
They cannot send me that information legally. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
All right, here we go, guys. Stand by, here we go.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Back here on DM Radio, talking to Sarang Bapat and Michael Baraz, two data governance experts. And, the topic in my mind now is project size. In the development world, you typically have sprints. A lot of times it'll be a 2-week sprint. You send off your folks, okay, go build me a data pipeline. They come back, you do your stand-up every day and say, okay, where are you? What problems are you having? All that kind of fun stuff. Can you give our audience a sense of what is a reasonable expectation for a data governance program for the first step, the second step? How long does it take? I know it depends upon the size of the organization, et cetera, but maybe Sarang first, just some thoughts on what is reasonable to expect. How long should these things take? Go ahead.
The first thing is trying to figure out what use case you are going to go after. And normally, at a minimum, there is a set of activities that you are doing for when you are talking about onboarding a business unit. And when you say you're onboarding a business unit, as in you're doing, providing training on what the tool looks like, what they need to do on the business metadata, technical metadata, data quality rules that they have to give you, then the tool implementation, and then the UAT and all of that. So usually depending upon, if you have a mid-sized business unit with about 3 or 4 assets, or up to 50 business critical elements, something like that, with 100 or so rules to begin with. With the set of tools that we have now, where a lot of those rules, Michael, you alluded to a while back about the machine learning based rules and others, which are very helpful to begin with. So your data stewards don't have to write a whole lot of rules initially, because that used to, like giving requirements of that used to take a long time. So if you carve out, like, in my opinion, 6 to 8 weeks for that first implementation for a business unit, which is about 5, assets with about 100 CDEs with 100 rules or so, I think that's a good estimate for them to start marching towards. And that's a prerequisite for all of that is your platform is ready, the data governance platform is ready and tool is built. Your resource who is going to technically customize all of that is ready. And now you're literally onboarding your business unit. So for that type of activity, I would say that's a good guess.
Yeah, that's good information. Michael, what are your thoughts on the time it takes to get up and running?
Right. Talking about the people side of the equation. So InfoSec has got a stake in this game, and they're not going to let you have access to all the data. So they're not going to, they're going to manage how you get access to it, I should say, and what you get access to. So doing data quality, you really need to be able to parse through data. And, sometimes getting DataSec to, InfoSec to buy into this thing and give us approval to get to some of these, more sensitive data sets is really hard, and it can take months. So 2-week sprint, we get an awful lot of rollovers to the next thing. So we've used Kanban for certain things and Scrum for others. We're definitely leaning toward the agile world. But there's two different flavors. Well, there's several different flavors too, of which are the ones I just mentioned, and then there's other ones. But I think you just have to be realistic about what can you do in 2-week sprints. So things that are projects, definitely, they're fine to do many of those things in a 2-week sprint type of Scrum method. But if you're looking at more foundational stuff, your typical setup stuff, your infrastructure development and all that, you might go Kanban.
Yeah, and I know that there are prepackaged data models that you can use. There have been those things for a long, long time now. And I think there are probably a decent number of rules like, BRMS, right? Business Rule Management Systems. We've had those for a long time too. How portable, Sarang, are some of these data quality rules, or do they have to be designed bespoke for a certain environment, for a certain technology? In other words, how declarative can a data quality rule be?
I think with the newer set of tools, the machine learning based ones, or what they specifically call as the reusable rules, I think those are very business agnostic, so to speak, so that they can be fairly nicely leveraged. But then if there are very customized ones, I think those something you have to look at. But the reusable rules are definitely the ones that can be ported directly.
Yeah, Michael, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's where, going back to, you mentioned data models, and I'll bring the term back, ontology, because they're very closely related. When I've got a class of data, and then I could basically apply the rule at the class, then every instance of that, every attribute where that occurs, I don't have to write new rules. I should be able to publish the rule for anything that is of that class. And now, that class goes back to how we build ontologies. So again, if we want to do stuff at scale, we can help ourselves by doing it that way, by making sure we've got a good ontology, being able to classify data as it comes, as new attributes and so on comes into the application, into the ecosystem, and then build off of that. And if there's things that don't fit that, well, then now we divide the class into subclasses, and we just continue to build out that ontology and make it more granular.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you want to be able to again, solve problems as far upstream as possible, and if at all possible, at the source, right? So really understanding your sources of data. I think ERPs are pretty well understood. Now, there is all this third-party data, that companies are getting these days. And that's a whole separate ball of wax, right? Sarang, third-party data?
Absolutely. And I think the part of the challenge with the third parties is some of the rules or some of the requirements have to be baked up into the contracts. So this is more of like a contractual when you're actually signing up with them, how much information you are sending and whether you are doing reconciliations to make sure what you are sending us is complete, that is landing in our space and all of that. So there is a lot of back and forth between how do you set some of those policies into the contract. It's a little bit of a challenging twist to that because of the legal aspects of it.
Mm-hmm. But that is, I mean, we talked earlier about policies that you can now write and enforce
Absolutely.
at the access level. I mean, you bake that into your data governance platform, and we're getting closer and closer, especially with these large language models, of being able to understand what this stuff says. Yeah. I mean, this will be a bit off track, but governance, like the government, right? They have laws and you have regulations that they get instantiated and then they have to be enforced and so on and so forth. And one of my ideas was to attach ChatGPT to the Federal Register, and anytime something shows up on the Federal Register, have an automatic story to spin out to say, okay, here's what happened, here's how it matters to you. Like, wow, we could suddenly make sense of these bills that are like 2,000 pages long. But maybe I'm getting optimistic.
You mean like Nancy Pelosi said, we never even read these 26,000 pages of law?
Yeah, you have to pass it to find out what's in it, right?
Right.
Can you imagine doing that at a large organization, saying, no, you just got to accept this data governance policy without reading it, and you'll find out later.
Yeah, what we publish with the SEC, right?
I think you'd be in jail is what would happen. I mean, and that is actually, I mean, a good closing comment to just throw out there is that increasingly organizations understand that there are benefits to data and there are risks to data, certainly PII and breaches and so on and so forth. And Sarang, that is another very good driver, because if you're this, right now the CEO and the CFO have to sign off on things, but I think you're going to see increasingly the CDO have to sign off on things too. What do you think, real quick, Sarang?
Yeah, some of those are, data and cyber, they're all converging together. And to your point, it's getting to that level of like actually how financial declaration is kind of like a data declaration might be a real thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so you have to declare what you're doing, what your policy is, and have some capacity to articulate what are we trying to accomplish here. I really do like that as a tactic, as a methodology, quite frankly. When you launch your project, what is the purpose of this project? We want to improve customer experience by mastering our customer data and increasing open rates or decreasing churn rates or whatever the case may be, because then you can track it over time and you can see, all right, we put this program in place in July, and by September, our numbers went sideways. Well, what's going on? It's a reality check that you want to bake into these things, right? You never want to do something for the sake of doing it. You're always trying to do something to improve the business. And by having these declarations very clearly baked into your data governance program or your center of excellence or whatever, now you're actually getting somewhere, because again, you can manage that. And what do senior executives want? They want to be able to articulate what is happening, whether it's to the board or to an auditor or to a potential partner, for example. There are all these different conversations you can have. The more you know about your data, the more you know about your programs, the better off you're going to be. Well, folks, that wraps it up for us for this episode. We have a podcast bonus segment coming up next. Look up Michael Baraz and Sarang Bapat on LinkedIn. You've been listening to DM Radio.
Pregnancy-related deaths in the U.S. have...
Hey, thank you so much, man. All right, we'll talk to you on Monday.
There was just one more point I was just dying to make, and that's sustainability.
We can do this. We can do this in a podcast bonus segment here. So let's go quiet for like 30 seconds.